The $4 trillion illusion, when scale masquerades as strength. India's rise to a $4 trillion economy has been framed as a definitive arrival. Headlines celebrate rankings. Political speeches cite league tables. Market commentary treats the milestone as proof of convergence with advanced economies. In nominal terms, India now stands among the largest economies on the planet. Yet for strategic economic analysis, the central question is not how large an economy appears, but how it functions beneath the aggregate. Gross domestic product, particularly in nominal terms, is a blunt instrument, measures total output, not lived prosperity, institutional capacity, or future resilience. For populous nations, scale alone can manufacture the illusion of strength. When economic size is divided across 1.4 billion people, the signal changes dramatically. Per capita income remains closer to lower middle-income peers than to advanced economies that India is now compared against by headline rank. This is the first analytical fault line. Comparing India's aggregate GDP to Japan, the United Kingdom, or France implies a similarity that does not exist in structure, productivity, or income depth. Japan's economy is smaller in total output, but rests on vastly higher labor productivity, deep industrial integration, advanced technological capabilities, and a mature institutional framework. India's output, by contrast, is spread across a dual economy, a narrow, globally integrated segment, and a vast informal base with low productivity and limited income security. The illusion emerges when numerical growth is mistaken for economic transformation. Growth rates can remain high even as structural weaknesses persist. Large populations absorb output without translating it into broad income gains. Informal employment masks, underutilization of labor, consumption grows, but innovation lags. The economy expands outward, not upward. Historically, this momentary ascent in aggregate size without proportional gains in income or productivity has marked a critical inflection point. Development economists describe it as the transition zone, where easy growth ends. Early gains driven by demographics, urbanization, and basic industrialization begin to exhaust themselves. What follows depends not on momentum, but on deliberate structural change. India's current indicators place it squarely in this transition zone. Per capita income remains modest. Employment generation has not kept pace with workforce expansion. Manufacturing's share of employment has stagnated, limiting absorption of surplus labor. A large portion of growth is concentrated in services that are either low productivity or highly exclusive, offering limited spillover to the broader population. This matters because scale without productivity is fragile. When growth is driven by consumption rather than competitiveness, economies become vulnerable to external shocks, capital volatility, and fiscal strain. When income growth is uneven, political pressure rises to prioritize short-term redistribution over long-term investment. The result is often policy drift reforms announced but not completed, strategies declared but not executed. At this stage, optimism itself becomes a risk. Celebratory narratives delay necessary course correction. GDP milestones are treated as proof of success rather than prompts for scrutiny. Structural weaknesses are reframed as temporary or dismissed as the cost of transition. In reality, this is precisely the moment when misdiagnosis becomes most expensive. Development history offers a consistent warning. Most countries that reach middle-income status do not progress to high-income levels. Growth slows, wages stagnate, inequality hardens, and competitiveness erodes. The economy does not collapse at plateaus, and once growth falters at scale, reversing the trend becomes exponentially harder. India's $4 trillion milestone, therefore, should not be read as an endpoint, but as a stress test. It reveals how much output the economy can generate under favorable conditions, but not how resilient or inclusive that output is. The question is no longer whether India can grow larger, it is whether it can grow differently. This distinction separates economies that merely expand from those that transform. Transformation requires productivity gains across the workforce, not just profits at the top. It requires institutions that allocate capital efficiently, education systems that produce adaptable skills, and industrial strategies that move beyond low-value integration into global supply chains. Without these shifts, scale becomes deceptive. The economy looks formidable from a distance, but internally remains constrained by the same bottlenecks that have limited many before it. This is where the illusion hardens, a belief that time and size alone will complete the journey. The next question, then, is unavoidable. If size is not sufficient, what prevents transition? And why have so many economies, despite optimism and momentum, stalled at precisely this stage? To answer that, the analysis must move beyond India itself and examine the structural trap that has defined the fate of numerous emerging economies before it. The middle-income trap is not a theory built on speculation, which is an empirical pattern observed repeatedly across decades of development history. Countries rise rapidly from low-income status through basic industrialization, urbanization, and demographic dividends, only to stall before reaching advanced economy income levels. Growth does not collapse. It slows, hardens, and becomes increasingly difficult to restart. At the core of the trap lies a transition failure. Early-stage growth relies on moving labor from low-productivity agriculture into higher productivity manufacturing and services. This process delivers rapid gains. But once wages rise and demographic advantages fade, competitiveness based on cheap labor erodes. To continue growing, economies must shift toward innovation, productivity-led expansion, and higher value-added activities. Most fail at this juncture. Comparative case studies illustrate how this failure unfolds. Malaysia entered the middle-income category decades ago with strong export performance and industrial capacity. Yet its growth plateaued as investment in advanced skills, research, and domestic innovation lagged. Manufacturing remained assembly-oriented rather than technology-driven. Productivity gains slowed, and income convergence stalled. The economy became efficient at what it already did, but unable to move up the value chain. Brazil followed a different path, but reached a similar outcome. Growth was increasingly driven by domestic consumption and commodity cycles rather than industrial upgrading. Social programs expanded demand, but productivity improvements failed to keep pace. Capital allocation favored protected sectors over competitive ones. Over time, inflationary pressures, fiscal strain, and declining competitiveness locked the economy into a low-growth equilibrium. South Africa presents a third variant: structural inequality, rigid labor markets, and weak industrial diversification prevented broad-based income growth. A modern financial sector coexisted with mass unemployment. Political constraints limited reform. The result was an economy that appeared sophisticated on paper, but remained deeply constrained in practice. Despite differences, these cases share common structural failure points. First, education systems expanded access, but not quality. Enrollment rose, but skill formation lagged behind the needs of a modern economy. Graduates entered labor markets misaligned with industry demand, suppressing productivity gains. Second, innovation capacity remained shallow. Research and development spending stayed low. Domestic firms relied on imported technology rather than generating their own. Without innovation ecosystems, economies struggled to compete beyond cost advantages. Third, capital allocation became inefficient. Financial systems favored established firms and politically connected sectors rather than productivity-enhancing investment. Entrepreneurship existed, but scaling remained limited. Fourth, labor absorption weakened. Manufacturing employment stagnated or declined before alternative high-productivity sectors could compensate. Informality persisted, trapping large portions of the workforce in low-income activities. India exhibits early signs of these same pressures. Growth has been strong, but employment generation has lagged. The informal sector remains dominant. Manufacturing has not absorbed labor at scale. Advanced services contribute disproportionately to GDP, but employ a narrow segment of the population. Productivity gains are uneven, concentrated in enclaves rather than diffused across the economy. This creates what can be described as a two-economy dynamic. One segment integrates with global markets, benefits from capital inflows, and participates in high-growth sectors. The other remains locked in low productivity, low income, and limited mobility. Aggregate GDP rises, but median outcomes stagnate. Inequality becomes structural rather than transitional. The persistence of optimistic narratives during this phase is not accidental. Political incentives favor headline growth. Large numbers are easier to communicate than structural reform. Media cycles reward milestones, not diagnostics. As long as growth continues, even at declining quality, warning signals are easy to ignore. Yet this is precisely when the trap tightens. Once productivity growth slows, fiscal space narrows. Social demands rise faster than revenues. Governments face pressure to stimulate consumption rather than invest in long-term capacity. Policy becomes reactive. Reform windows close. The critical insight from comparative experience is that the middle-income trap is not caused by a single policy error. It is the cumulative result of delayed decisions. Each year of postponement raises the cost of transition. Each cycle of growth without reform deepens dependence on existing structures. India is not yet trapped, but neither is it immune. The patterns observed elsewhere are not distant warnings, they are structural signals. The question is no longer whether growth can continue under current conditions, but whether it can evolve before those conditions become constraints. To understand how escape is possible, the analysis must now turn to the few cases that succeeded. Economies that confronted these pressures early and made choices that altered their trajectory rather than prolonging their momentum. Escaping the trap, strategic lessons in policy, IMPLSEATO, is the middle-income trap is not inevitable. History records a small number of economies that recognized the danger early and altered their development path before stagnation set in. These cases are not defined by speed alone, but by sequence. Growth was deliberately restructured before scale hardened inefficiency. Among them, South Korea remains the most instructive contrast to economies that stalled. South Korea's escape was not the result of market forces acting independently. It was a coordinated transformation anchored in productivity, exports, and institutional discipline. Industrial policy was not symbolic, it was conditional. Firms received state support only in exchange for performance, particularly in export competitiveness. Failure was penalized. This created incentives not for expansion alone, but for upgrading. Crucially, human capital development preceded demographic maturity. Education policy emphasized quality, technical competence, and alignment with industrial needs. As wages rose, productivity rose faster. The economy moved into higher-value manufacturing and eventually into technology-intensive sectors. Growth did not depend on consumption expansion, but on external competitiveness and innovation capacity. This sequencing matters. Economies that attempt redistribution or consumption-led expansion before productivity is embedded often exhaust fiscal space without building resilience. South Korea delayed broad consumption gains until its productive base could sustain them. This restraint is what allowed income growth to be durable rather than cyclical. For India, the implications are structural rather than ideological. Escaping the trap requires a shift from growth by accumulation to growth by transformation. Productivity must become the primary metric of success, not aggregate output. Employment generation must move from informal absorption to formal, scalable sectors. Manufacturing and advanced services must integrate, not compete for policy attention. Time is a critical constraint. India's demographic window is finite. As the workforce ages, the cost of inefficiency rises. Without sufficient job creation in productive sectors, demographic advantage becomes demographic pressure. The next decade will determine whether population size remains an asset or becomes a fiscal and political liability. Institutional capacity will determine outcomes more than intent. Education reform must address learning outcomes, not enrollment targets. Financial systems must allocate capital toward productivity-enhancing investment rather than asset inflation. Infrastructure must be evaluated on logistics efficiency and industrial linkage, not project volume. These are execution challenges, not vision statements. Federal coordination adds another layer of complexity. Growth and reform are uneven across states. Without alignment between central strategy and regional implementation, gains remain fragmented. Successful transition requires not uniformity, but coherence, shared incentives, measurable outcomes, and accountability mechanisms. The geopolitical implications of failure are often underestimated. A permanently middle-income India would retain scale without influence commensurate with its size. Economic stagnation limits military modernization, technological autonomy, and diplomatic leverage. Strategic ambition without economic depth produces vulnerability rather than power. Conversely, successful transition would alter regional and global balances. Productivity-driven growth would support sustained defense spending, technological leadership, and resilience against external shocks. The difference between these outcomes lies not in aspiration but in policy discipline. GDP milestones, therefore, should trigger concern, not celebration. They mark the point at which easy growth ends and strategic choices begin. Reading this moment risks locking the economy into a stable but suboptimal equilibrium too large to ignore. It's constrained to lead. The central warning is simple. Size buys time, not immunity. History does not reward economies for reaching milestones. It rewards those that treat milestones as deadlines. India's $4 trillion economy is not proof of arrival, it is a test of direction. Whether the illusion persists or dissolves will depend on decisions made now before growth slows, before constraints harden, and before opportunity costs become irreversible. Thank you for giving this analysis your time. In a world of fast headlines and short attention spans, your willingness to stay until the end already sets you apart. If this case study helped you see beyond the numbers, beyond rankings and political slogans, then this channel is built for you. So, if you're someone who still believes that understanding the world requires patience, context, and clear thinking, consider subscribing. Think of it not as clicking a button, but as bookmarking a place you can return to when you want serious, grounded analysis without noise or exaggeration. And if you feel this discussion deserves a wider audience, share it with someone who still enjoys a thoughtful conversation over surface-level optimism. Once again, thank you for watching. We look forward to seeing you in the next analysis.